observations. It's quite possible that we could miniaturize the tools of those observations, deploy them on other types of equipment, and replace what today, as we rely on surface buoys, possibly replace them with autonomous craft that might just be circling an area, patrolling an area, but gathering those same observations, but increasingly more dense observations, and having a greater period of residence in those areas of the ocean. Whereas now, we can sample singular sites where a buoy array might exist, just in that vertical where the buoy might be. It's very expensive to go out and maintain those buoys, and if we can have three-dimensional, greater density of observations being generated, we'll know those areas better. We'll have more information to feed into our observation and forecast component. We had, during the course of the meeting or the town hall that we had last year, a roving discussion, and we solicited remarks and feedback from people. And we distilled in this slide some of the results that I think is important to share with you as a takeoff point from where we are. And the first point was just short and simple. Once again, as you carouse the showroom floor and see the technology that is available, you'll probably see that there's some material here this year that wasn't here last year. You'll probably see that 5 years ago, there's a dramatic change in what's on that technology floor. So we're seeing in our community something that might even challenge Moore's law of the rate of production of technology, not just in the speed or rapidity of computers, but with the availability of tools and technology that can conceivably do a job that just a year, 3 years ago was not attainable, not achievable, certainly was in the eye of a really smart group of people who were trying to make it. And those are the folks we're trying to reach in order to gain some help in achieving this objective that we have. So are there platforms, are there sensors that can meet our science requirements? And we're labeling that carefully. We're repeating that as our science requirements rather than simply sustaining that same observation. Good starting point is to figure out if we could put our existing sensors and measuring devices, sensing devices, on other tools and other platforms. That clearly will answer the question. But we also want to inspire folks to find maybe a better way to do what it is that we're doing. Second point, intercalibration is critical. From the fisheries mission, we're responsible for managing the nation's commercial fisheries in federal waters. And we need to ensure this industry, that is a highly regulated industry, that whatever technology we might transition to is of at least equal reliability to the technology that we have been using. So we need to plan for that intercomparability period, which will have arguably both systems operating side by side so that we can prove the utility and the fidelity of whatever new method we might come up with. We had some very good comments from a colleague of ours in NOAA, Liz Clark, who's out of the Alaska Fishery Science Center, about the experience that center and also the New England Center has used in making these intercomparisons. It's a period of 3 to 4 years in order to reliably conclude that the new technology can replace the old technology. And that's an expensive notion to run two in parallel. Lastly then, the notion of a concept of operations, which is abbreviated in military lingo as CONOPS, but the concept of operations, in other words, the layperson's understandable explanation of how this stuff would work. That's really what we're talking about, and an ability to lay that out as an alternative to what we may be doing today. The concept of operations may be very different. We may find solutions that have commercial operators deploying vehicles that have capable sensors to answer these science questions, and maybe we just buy the data from that commercial operator. Whereas today, we own the ships, we engage the scientists, both university and NOAA scientists, to conduct the work out at sea. There may be other models to be looking at, and the door is wide open and the floor is unoccupied, so we want to see whatever possible solutions might emerge. Now, we talked last year about providing an opportunity to hear from industry or academia, or both, in a consortium of interests, or singularly. What ideas do you have? And we were going to publish a request for information, or an RFI, as the notion is, and we didn't do it, and we didn't get to it. And we have, I think, two principal reasons why we didn't get to it, and I need to share those with you. I feel responsible to this community who's been trying to follow us and work with us to attain this level of technology infusion. Number one was, in this financial environment, we don't have the money immediately to promise a future on whatever community we get inspired to come running to this question, to try and help us with this question. We wanted to wait till we had a greater path of surety, and right now, as I stand before you, not sure whether the federal government will have what kind of status of service to the American people in the beginning of next week. We're a little iffy. So this season has continued, and we wanted to make sure that we were capable of managing expectations. So that's one. But the mainstream reason is the people that we have clustered together inside of NOAA to try and deal with this question on the wet side or the undersea side are folks who are dual tasked, triple tasked. We don't have a full-time enterprise that does this. We are lucky that we have a full-time enterprise that does do this on the aerial side. So for the unmanned aerial vehicle systems, we have a dedicated program that has several $1 million that is able to do this work, and those dedicated people can continue to make progress. So to be honest with you, we're doing the best we can. We're kind of limping along trying to bring our undersea solutions together. But I do see some optimism coming because, as I've probably belabored far too much, the economic situation we find ourselves in makes really unsustainable the current methods that we're using at sea. So we have to find a solution. The economic argument will allow us to advance this. So we did have, at a local level inside of NOAA, when I say local, it's a component of NOAA that has a rather large responsible body of work for our organization. That's the National Data Buoy Center down in Stennis, Mississippi. And there was a request for information on what solutions may be within the commercial, academic, or other sectors to provide in sustaining meteorological observations at sea. So that was put out in November 2012. We also have several other opportunities that folks need to be aware of so that you might be able to help us and or compete for the money. But we have several through the International Ocean Observation Program, or the IUS program, and also the Exploration program has a funding opportunity as well that is technology oriented. So we are putting opportunities out on the street, we are putting some money out on the street, and we do encourage you to pay attention to what those are. Karen Kahanowicz will speak a little bit more in detail to those. Another step we're taking, which made us not yet ripe to put our RFI out on the street for folks, is that we've consolidated inside of NOAA between the Noaa Fleet, which is our routine operator of the hardware that we buy to access ocean observations. Today we call those our ships by and large, but whatever technology awaits us in the future, it's the Noaa Fleet enterprise that really manages that for us as an agency. And then we also have several other components, several other line organizations in NOAA that are principal in leading this. The organization I represent, the research organization in NOAA, or Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, we, along with the fleet, have been tasked by Dr. Sullivan to bring together a strategy for unoccupied craft, or UXS, X being the variable. It's either aerial or undersea, or any other dimension you want to think of. But right now we're only knowing of two. So for the UXS strategy that we're developing, we have, first, we feel a responsibility to nail that down, and then with that strategy in mind, because of latent synergies that may exist between the aerial and the undersea, and the possibility of those vehicles talking to each other in a complex of observations that may satisfy multiple areas of inquiry, this strategy should be an important tool in place that you can read, understand, digest, and then apply your intellect to that complex suite of solutions that we have. So the process of getting through that is, again, taking longer than we had hoped. Again, it is resource dependent in our ability to complete this work. So far in that complex, we have, as you'll see from this list, if you're familiar with any of these vehicles, we have more aerial vehicles in trial than we do undersea vehicles. I'll not read them, you can go ahead and read them. At least two of these devices are on the showroom floor. Obviously this is an aerial show. If you have interest in that, I would hope that you might attend to, for example, the AUVSI workings. It's another professional association that deals with unoccupied or unmanned vehicles. But basically the two wet ones that we're looking, or three wet ones that we're looking at here principally, two are commercially produced, and one is produced by an academic setting, and then we're also working with our colleagues in Boeing on sensor adaptation and looking at other opportunities that we would have in the undersea environment. If we look in the aerial environment, you can see several of the craft that we're working with there. At this point, in recognizing, I'd like to recognize my co-chair in a federal role that I additionally serve in as the co-chair of the National Ocean Partnership Program. I want to acknowledge Dr. Rodney Cluck, who's sitting in the back. And Rodney and I co-chair the National Ocean Partnership Program. That's a program that was created in law by Congress that charges the federal agencies to work together collaboratively to find and develop partnerships with academia, industry, NGOs, anyone who wants to be working in the ocean environment. And one of the things that Rodney and I will be talking about tomorrow in greater detail under the NOP program banner is our desire to really find industry partners that we can really bring in to help knock out the kind of science that we all need to get done. But much like in the earlier plenary today when Greg was speaking from Chevron about the interest that Chevron and the Deep Star program has of an amalgam or a consortium of multiple business interests working in the ocean trying to solve problems together, it would elude me to think that there are not commonalities in what the interest that community is trying to solve versus what we would have as a federal community of scientists and agencies trying to serve the public interest. So we'll have more to do with NOP tomorrow, but today the focus is this technology forum that Karen is going to tell you a little bit more about. TFORT, as we refer to it, it was created in law as well, and it's administered under the National Ocean Partnership Program, and it's included within it. It deals with partnership, and it deals with an opportunity for us to be putting together, again, solutions that we hadn't imagined yet. So Karen, I'll turn the podium to you. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Craig. A quick question for folks. Who here was at the 2003 Oceans in the same spot? Oh, good number. Good number. Outstanding. That was one of the first Oceans I think I attended, and I'm very pleased to be here to present a program that I hope continues each year at Oceans. So I'd like you to take a look at this and be thinking in that manner as far as some of the information we're presenting here and what you'd like to see each year as Oceans continues. As Craig mentioned, I'm here to talk about an interagency task force on ocean exploration and research, technology, and infrastructure. I'm the co-chair of this task force. I'm also the acting deputy director for NOAA's Office of Ocean Exploration and Research. I'll give you a little bit more on the structure of this task force as we go along. Let me give you essentially the anchor for where this comes from. In 2009, Congress passed Public Law 111-11. It's a pretty huge law. If you go to, I think it's section 12, there are about 6 different ocean aspects in this law. Section 12 talks about the Ocean Exploration Program. It establishes a national ocean exploration program under the auspices of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency. Also within that law, it directs NOAA to convene an ocean exploration and undersea research TFORT. It's too many words with that one, so that's why we went to TFORT. It tells us to establish this task force, and it gives us 5 different activities that the Congress expects us to do with this task force. Facilitate transfer of exploration and research technology, communications infrastructure, including satellites. As you might imagine, you definitely need some interagency work and interaction for that. Data management processing, public outreach activities, and encourage cost-sharing partnerships. So this is the congressional basis for this group. And then to continue to set the stage, this is the executive implementation of the group. Don't worry about all the stuff on the top. This was all established by the National Ocean Policy. We have a top-level executive department group that oversees the ocean policy of the nation. Some people might be very familiar with this. Again, you'll see more about this during the NOP presentation tomorrow. My spoiler there to have you also come to Craig and Rodney's presentation tomorrow at 3 o'clock. The place that the TFORT group fits is under the Ocean Science and Technology Policy Committee. There are 2 working groups that specifically address undersea technology and ocean data collection technology Facilities and Infrastructure, and also the Ocean Partnerships Program, which works with NOAA. We report directly, the T-Fort reports directly to the Ocean Partnerships Program, but we also work with the Facilities and Infrastructure group. So just, that's pretty much where we sit in the executive organization for all of this. It's a relatively new group. We've been active for about a year. I'm a co-chair. Brian Midson, who is with the Ocean Sciences Division at National Science Foundation, is the other co-chair. He's also the program officer for the National Deep Submergence Facility, which runs the Alvin. So he has a lot of interaction with the different facilities that NSF runs. We have representatives from NASA, ONR, the NOAA IUS side, and also the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management that are active representatives, and we're also looking to grow to other agencies to be involved in this. So when you think about, or when I think about a technology program, I think about three essential components. There's the toys, the technology. I've heard the toy-based management. We've kind of used that throughout my career in wrestling with different management of technology. So you have your tools, you have the hardware, you have your people, your rules, your users, your operations, the interaction, the using of the technology to get things done. And then you have the resources. You have the funding to enable all this to work. The T-Fort group, right now anyway, is not really engaged in the money to the hardware at this point. We'd like to be. We'd like to be able to work up to having more direct access to funds in order to meet the priorities, but right now that's really not where we are. We are really engaged in the communication and partnership aspect of things, in trying to connect the different agencies to talk together and also connect the public and private to work together on opportunities to use some of the technologies to meet the emerging exploration and research missions. And then also to make the users aware of funding opportunities. That's one of the reasons I'm here as well, is to say, let's get out here and have a forum to be able to say, these are the things that are coming up this year for federal funding opportunities, maybe growing into other types of funding opportunities for us. So what we did as a small group, we took the law, the mandates for the law, and said, what do we need for a 5-year plan? What kind of things do we really want to do and accomplish? And we came up with these 4 major activities. Catalog of priority technology capabilities. You can call this a number of things, your top 10 list, different things. What are the important things we really want to focus on? Investigate technology solutions, and then the communication aspect. Communicate these needs to partners, and also look at the funding aspect. So essentially, my talk will be broken into two parts. The first is the kind of the priorities, and how do we set those priorities, and then second, a more direct description of some of these funding and partnership opportunities. And again, kind of the conceptual ideas of what does a technology program look like. Anytime you need to get people together to develop technology to get out in the field, what are your requirements? The requirements lead to what kind of data do you need to collect to meet those requirements? What type of technology capabilities can collect that data? And then what kind of program mechanisms can get the data or get the technology in the field? And then how do you come up with the solutions? So as we try to develop these capabilities, the question always comes back, what are the requirements? And as you heard Craig say this morning, nothing is just exploration. There's exploration and research. So really when you look at the requirements for exploration and research, it's informative to just kind of go back in history. If you start even in the 1800s, it's like, why do we explore? You know, what are we getting from exploring and doing the undersea research? So what are ocean exploration priorities? In the early 1800s and 19th century, it's because it's there. Because it's unknown. That was really enough reason. You know, the Beagle, the Challenger, the U.S. exploration expedition with Lieutenant Wilkes in the 1840s, who just went because it was unknown. And then in the 20th century, we saw an environmental or an international decade of ocean exploration in 1970. And it was a full decade, 10 years of funding that was directed under the auspices of ocean exploration. But the notable thing about that was because it was for different applications. The international decade was broken into 4 priority areas, and those were very mission-driven. You looked at environmental quality, what's the impact of the upcoming pollution awareness, dumping radioactive waste into the ocean, environmental forecasting, the seabed assessment, manganese nodules had been an emerging issue, and also living resources as folks realized that we need to take care of the fish in order to continue to have fish. It was a very much more applied, it was a very applied aspect. And so it's really because it's important. The decade was very unique as far as also creating multi-institutional, multinational, multi-agency partnerships to really kick off big science, big ocean science, instead of small projects. So it really set the stage for some of the bigger projects. After the 80s, the funding was really absorbed into the existing mechanisms, continued to be applied to mission activities and to the National Science Foundation Ocean Sciences Division. But then in 2000, we had the Year of the Ocean in 1998, and we saw a reemergence of the realization that it's still important, it's still unknown. There are still unknown things, and it's important to recognize that things are unknown and that we need to keep exploring and find out what those unknown things, and look for those unknown things, as well as look for things that are important. So we had an Ocean Commission report that kicked off the need for a President's Panel in ocean exploration. This President's Panel in 2000 set up the ocean exploration program that we have today. I'll talk a little bit more about that here. And then as recently this past summer, the Aquarium of the Pacific helped us out with a new forum. It's a stakeholder forum that really engaged a broader group of ocean exploration stakeholders to take another look at those priorities and take a look at the national program. What would that look like? And I'll talk about that a little bit more as well. So really going back to what Craig said this morning, it's ocean exploration and research. You really don't, it blends into each other. Focus on new areas of inquiry and a collection of basic observations. So when you get to the program level and your program manager say, okay, what does that mean? How do I use this information to select my priorities? What we've done really is we use the concept of a baseline characterization. And so with the baseline characterization, if you put it in the sense of resolution, and so you have a large-scale identification of different basins. What's the level of exploration? What's the level of knowledge of Arctic, Gulf of Mexico, different types of basins? You can do a geographic categorization of that. From there, you can go to a feature scale categorization. How do you identify boundaries of different data types within those basins? And so there you start getting into the more functional data types. You have bathymetry, biological, chemical, and physical data. Cultural, which really is cultural in the sense of marine archaeology, and also cultural in the sense of the impact that humans might have. Essentially, when you're exploring, you want to have an overall characterization of what's there. So you don't want to ignore something just because it's anthropomorphic, or anthropogenic, excuse me. And then when you go to the next level, you start getting into the research aspect. You start getting into the level of detail that's used more often by research scientists. There are also still things to discover at these levels. Microbes are a really good example. There's so much we don't know about microbes, but those are down in a smaller resolution level. The good thing about this with the technology aspect is you can translate it almost directly to some of the technologies that we use. And so you can take a look at measurement in time and measurement in space and map the technologies into that space. So just kind of conceptual ways of thinking. The final answer, as always, is yet to be, but these kind of give us a framework to make our priority decisions. And so when we do set up that framework, here's some of the criteria we're looking at within the TFORT group and also within our Ocean Exploration and Research Technology group for how do we set those criteria. We look at the baseline characterizations, the whole idea of increase the pace, scope, and efficiency. As Craig just mentioned, the shipborne model is not sufficient anymore. We've got to look for other ways. We're really focusing on the technology, the higher technology readiness levels and the application of existing or almost ready-to-go technologies to existing problems. And then we're looking to address the high-priority ocean exploration themes, which I haven't gotten to, but that is what's next. So when we go back to the President's Panel in 2000, this set up our current NOAA's ocean exploration program for mapping, exploring in new scales, new sensors, and an outreach component. The priorities that were identified within that report, the EEZ, Arctic, you can see the exploring ocean dynamics, new scales was emphasized to a great degree, from minutes to hours to days. Sea surface dynamics, new sensors with the remote sensing, capitalization of assets, ships, and then the different ways to reach out to stakeholders, the partnerships, and starting to get our feet in the water for telepresence. At the National Forum, we took a look at, stakeholders took a look at new types of new priorities that had emerged in the past 10 years. And some of those are captured here. The water column came out as a top priority. The Arctic, as far as the geographic area, the processes of ocean acidification has become a big issue in the past 10 years. Sensors, autonomous vehicles have gained importance, and also alternative sampling, non-destructive sampling in place where you don't have to actually bring a sample back to the surface to figure out what it's doing or what the characteristics are of that. The other aspect is engagement. A lot more we've learned a lot about telepresence, a lot of operational lessons learned, a lot of ways to engage citizens, and a lot more interest in citizen science. So, and again, another spoiler, on Thursday morning, you'll learn a lot more about the forum. We'll have a panel about the forum from some of the participants of the forum in the morning. And then also following that, we'll have an ocean exploration telepresence enabled exploration that'll talk a lot more about the citizen science and some of the activities that have been going on with that program. Okay. Let me take any quick questions about all that? Okay. I'm not sure what the ocean's policy is on that. I don't have a problem. Come and talk to me afterwards. Let's see what we got. Okay, and we'll open the floor up for a lot of questions after I finish with all this as well. Okay, so I'll go right into the funding opportunities, and there are a number of funding opportunities that are on the street and expected to be on the street by the end of the year. As Craig mentioned, these are mostly looking at kind of incorporating technologies into some research goals. And so right now we're really not looking for, we want a technology that does X, Y, Z, but we're looking at combining some of the technology and research activities together to move some of these priorities forward. We've got 2 that'll be worked on through the Ocean Partnership Program and 3 programs that we're looking at through NOAA. The Biodiversity Observation Network, if there's anyone interested, especially interested in biodiversity, I will direct you to this report that came out that has a lot of really good information. Summary of the announcement is really to demonstrate how a biodiversity observational network could work. And they have a couple priority areas or priority types of environments that they want to see this work in. The deep sea, continental shelves, estuaries, and coral reefs. The funding opportunity was released in the middle of August. There's the number for that. I believe that was in grants.gov. Yeah, that's in grants.gov. I think a lot of the funding announcements here, you'll find it in the grants.gov page. Right now they're looking at $500,000 to $2 million a year for up to 5 years. The first proposals, the proposals are due in December. So you'll see all these announcements of proposals are due this year. The second one through the NOT program is the Marine Arctic Ecosystem Study. This is a study that's targeted toward the Beaufort Sea and a little bit toward the edge of the Chukchi Sea. They're looking at using automated data collection to characterize these aspects of the Chukchi Sea. There's a lot of kind of cultural integration with that as well, but a real focus on the automated data collection. This study is being finalized as we speak. The BOEM, it's led by BOEM, and we should see an announcement out by the end of this year. There's an initial $5 million, still working on additional funding for that one, and looking for a pilot project next year. So that one, there's also some more information about what kind of things we're looking for within the proposal for that. But that's just something to keep your eyes open for that project. Within NOAA, the IUSE program, or the IUSE and NOAA has put out a request for proposals for marine sensors and ocean acidification technology, sensing technology. The marine sensor transition, the marine sensor technology is looking at transitioning existing sensors to the needs for ocean observing organizations. The ocean acidification topic is looking at measuring the different aspects that you need in order to measure the equation for ocean acidification. So you can read some of the aspects of that. They're also looking at different technology readiness levels. It's essentially two separate but related announcements folded into one. And both of these are also focused towards the needs of the stakeholders. So they're looking for awareness and interaction with stakeholders for these projects. This one, again, was also released in the middle of August on grants.gov, and here's the funding that's available. Letters of intent due in November. Ocean exploration, our program just released a funding opportunity last week. We're looking essentially at a broad ocean exploration mission with geographic priorities that are listed here and thematic priorities that are listed here. So again, this isn't, we want you to build a widget, but it's how can you use some advanced widgets to conduct some activities that meet these needs. And again, this was just released on grants.gov. And this is always the caveat I think that everybody is used to is Congress willing. All the funding amounts here are all dependent on appropriations levels once those come through. With a target of about a dozen plus or minus proposals, 1 to 2 year duration. We're looking for proposals towards the middle of next month. So this one is relatively quick turnaround. We want to get some ideas on the table quickly. And just a note about other opportunities. This is an opportunity that's already closed and it's ongoing. But the Office of Naval Research, I'm sure folks that are familiar with these type of broad area announcements, broad agency announcements, have seen these type of things come out. ONR has departmental research initiatives. The Marginal Ice Zone Program is one such initiative. It's going to be similar to the mayor's in that they're looking at the Beaufort and Chuck GC with a goal of using under ice sensors and on ice sensors for a full suite of measurements in the Arctic. So just another example of some of the things that are going on throughout government for actually integrating the technologies into some research aspects of things. And finally, and again, if you were at the plenary this morning, you heard Craig mention the grand challenge for ocean mapping. NOAA has, and the president has asked for $10 million for a prize, for an ocean mapping prize that NOAA would administrate. And again, different numbers back from Congress, and once we get the appropriation back, we'll know how much we have for that and how that will go. We do intend to manage that through the NOP program. Okay, and that, excuse me, those are the different funding opportunities, and I want to stop here and first see if you have any questions and then ask you all a question or two. Any questions for either me or for Craig? Yes.
One question. Most of the topics that have been discussed seem to be focused on the deep ocean. I was sort of wondering, does that consciously exclude the littoral zone, or is it encompassing both?
It's actually, I think, not necessarily. Not necessarily. I think some of the exploration aspect, it might end up start looking towards the deep ocean will be one of the topics. But if you look at, let's see, where are we? The biodiversity aspect is looking at a number of different regions. We've got some, I guess, the Arctic aspects, the kind of regional aspects. So
let me try and come at this in a parallel way. In a parallel way. It's not a different answer, but I want to be more direct. Yes, it includes littoral. Yes, it includes coastal. Because the conversation has started at the inspiration of Congress, telling us start a technology forum to enable exploration of the oceans, we probably know a little bit more about the coastal band than we do about the off-shelf and the deeper water. But in terms of our hunt for the right technology to economize our methods of doing business, the coastal and the shallow water is equally as much a motivator for us from a technology advancement perspective. And I think we could probably have a pretty good discussion just from the gathering in this room to establish the relative level of confidence we have about what we really do know about coastal processes, given that there's such great variables running off land and that there are great mixing phenomena that are largely wind but current driven as well that mix the deep water with the shallow. So we're looking at all of it. So if the focus is a little bit more from some folks in this room of an interest towards the coastal and littoral, by all means, that should not be frustrated. That should be rewarded. We're looking at that too. But when Congress said go establish an interagency forum to bring about the transfer of technology from industry to government and academia, recognizing how technology might have been developed for perhaps a military application, not necessarily with a civilian science application in mind, but that with slightly more investment or slight redirection of product, we can have a wonderfully enabling tool for the coastal and or deep water science. That's really what Congress was getting about, and using exploration as the tempting subject for it. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
Great talk on encouraging interaction, interactivity between government agencies and U.S. industries. Is there any outreach into the international community or the global community for those technologies or partnerships there? Is that allowed in this?
That's a good question, and I think very pertinent as we're a growing program. Right now, we're really identifying our core U.S. agencies that are interested and looking to grow that, and certainly the international aspect is not excluded from that. So it's at this point, it's not an exclusion; it's just a development of the program.
So as we do our tag team,
that's it.
I would highlight that through a series of relationships that NOAA has, and I'm sure each of the other federal agencies does as well, we have bilateral agreements with the NOAA equivalent in other nations, and we have technology as a subject in just about every one of those bilateral agreements so that we can be trying to help advance the same type of ambition across the board. The European Union and European Commission being one of them, they have some marvelous programs available, but I would promise you that we have not maximized the potential of that international collaboration. A follow-up remark, you're welcome to.
No, I was just going to point out that bilateral is great, but there are other international organizations that the United States is part of that you might want to look into as well.
You're open to suggestions, please. That's what we're here for. Because we really want to run this like a town hall after giving you a little bit of information. We'd like to have a conversation. So,
well, not to be too coy about it, but NATO's just undergone a kind of reorganization, realignment, and the science and technology aspects of NATO have been carved out into now a civil agency rather than the military part of NATO. Although our mission continues to be to support collective defense, collective security, that the idea of what collective security in the Atlantic might look like has been expanded. There are a lot of technologies at places like CMRE that you might be interested in.
very good. Thank you. Thank you.
And I'm assuming there'll still be a Navy connection with that. I know we've got.
We certainly do have a Navy
right.
connection. ONR is heavily connected to our government structure, but nonetheless, there's a broader opportunity.
Okay, outstanding. Tim Schnorr's on our group, so we'll be back with him on that.
So, Jules got some scripts.
think for your last question, I'll just tackle that one first, because we really are looking at the integration of technology to do some exploration projects. And so,
or discovery or exploration results.
yes,
So not
yes.
just I got a gizmo, but I'm going to learn something. And
Exactly.
that's interesting to me.
Exactly, exactly. We hope to get to the point where we want some gizmos. We're building towards something like that, but right now we're looking at integrating those into the exploration activities.
Yeah, so when you talk about mission profile, in the beginning we talked about NOAA does atmosphere and weather, and then they do, seafloor and what's below it, and then we do, I forget whether it was environment or ecology. I think it was one of your first slides. So how does NOAA see its mission in terms of ecology versus environment, or does it matter, or does it matter for everything? It's kind of a vague question, I agree.
So, but a good question, and I appreciate that, because what I was trying to do in summary was a much longer explanation about the different mission profiles that relate to the convenient term that we're using of ecological characterization. But that also would include fishery stocks and the assessment of fish stocks. That would include planktonic surveys and assessments. Basically, everything in the water column that constructs the ecology that we are routinely looking at. But large footnote next to routinely goes back to the comment this morning with the shot glass. How about the microbes? And we're really missing the microbes. So the standing question is, and I know there are a lot of different answers to this, can we still do our job without exploring, discovering, understanding the entire marine ecosystem? And I think there are a lot of people of wisdom who would say, you may be surprised of what you don't know and how that really fits into the larger picture of the total ecosystem. But for the convenience of brevity, NOAA's mission largely is to know and understand from an ecological perspective those marine areas that we are responsible to manage, whether they be through fisheries regulations applied to certain geographic areas, whether they be marine protected areas, just kind of know your neighborhood sort of thing. But then the question really evolves, how well do you choose to know your neighborhood? And I think from a funding perspective, particularly in the economy we find ourselves in nationally, it's very difficult to try and posit the argument that we should know our neighborhood a little bit better just in case. Probably the best evidence of the just in case was the marvelous role that microbes played in the Gulf of Mexico, but we didn't know it at the time. And we might have had the ability to exploit other alternative methodologies if we knew about that facet of the ecosystem in the Gulf of Mexico. But by and large, for us to make requests for a funding source to just know our neighborhood a little bit better and then stop there, tough time to be arguing for that. So suffice to say, it's traditionally our coastal management mission, marine area management mission. I'm talking water column now, specifically to your question, and then the fisheries mission writ large, which also includes the protection of endangered species and marine mammal species as well, and their ecosystem.
Well, I guess without being overly critical,
Please be critical. We're a public government.
So I'm an academic. I got tenure, right? But you get pissed off that I still got a job. I got having funding, but I still got a job. So, the implication is that you're doing your job good enough right now.
We like him.
Right? Sorry. Are you doing your job good enough right now? Because from a guy who develops technology, I'd probably like to help you do your job better. So why set the bar so you see what I'm saying?
It's a hard question to answer, because for us to say, are we doing our job as best as we can, I doubt that there's a public funded element that could really say, yeah, we've got everything ad infinitum that we might possibly need or use. And that's why we're really reaching out to you, because the depth of this community is far greater than the resources we could bring to bear, and to be able to gain from what insight the extended community may have. I think that's how we're gonna perfect these challenges that we have in front of us. So easiest way to answer it is we want to do better, and that's why we're reaching towards you. But so what we're hopeful to have happen here, one could say if we could write just a big enough check, it all would be solved, and that would be a cheater's way out of this, because we know what the realities are. But we have to find that sweet spot where we might divest from certain areas in our current budget in order to redirect and invest in other areas. And what I hope you take away from this discussion is particularly if you were here last year for the two brave gentlemen who struggled out through two sessions of this. Number one, we're pretty slow. We are not a nimble and expediently enabled branch of government that could just generate new resources and boldly move out in another area, because as a mission agency, those missions have a legacy and an inertia that we have to keep addressing. So our course corrections, our rudder changes are subtle, and we're not the fastest guys in town in order to break out into a new direction. Okay, that's point one. But point two is that we're going to have to do those slow changes with the technology advancement of what is largely already built, but just subtly redirected. And that seems to be the most pragmatic way that we could go about doing this, that doesn't totally waste your time, but also gives us a realistic expectation that we might be able to arrive at a better point in a couple of years, looking at a couple of years worth of cycle. And how well do we do our job? Written into some of our laws that compel us to conduct certain studies and certain assessments and the like is that we are challenged to use and therefore conduct the best available science. And that by and large gives us the societal balance that we can't spend infinite money on answering some of these questions and just do the best that we can. Thank you. Oh, and while we're dealing with someone with tenure in the academic community, I want to underscore the notion here that so much of NOAA's mission is accomplished in partnership with academic elements that perform consistently and marvelously in helping us get our mission done. And we execute that across the country through a number of cooperative institutes. There are a number of other questions, and I'm thrilled by that. Patty.
Yeah, and speaking about boldly going, have you engaged at all with NASA? I'm thinking particularly JPL, where the technological work for specified for missions granted, and therefore very focused on achieving something that they want to try to achieve. If you could work together with NASA to be able to push through the development of small economic, more advanced sensors in particular, I'm thinking about that, probably would be a good thing to do. They've got a lot more funding than most of the rest of the scientific community.
I appreciate that comment, and I have to surrender myself to this group and say that we probably have not done as much as we can or as good a job as we could in dealing with NASA on the earth science front in order to find the greater harmonies. It would be interesting if a NASA person were able to answer that question similarly or differently, but I think there's a lot of room for us to be able to align more closely. I think it was National Geographic picked up a characterization that was independently authored, and I forget the author's name, but I know the genesis of the author's material. It's the U.S. federal budget. There's a 150 times multiplier for the money that we spend in exploring space versus exploring the oceans. And I think you're very right that there are opportunities there if we're looking at technologies to do certain functions extraplanetarily. We might be able to apply some of those in a more immediate sense. And I think there are synergies that we've not maximized yet. Back in 2001, I think it was, and I'm looking over at Steve Hammond, who's our retired chief scientist from the Ocean Exploration Program. I think it was 2001 that we had a LINC, as in named after Edwin Link, excuse me, the LINC symposium down at Kennedy Space Center. You were there. And it was a really good joining of the ambitions that the space community and the ocean community had, and perhaps not necessary to get to the same level of integration as the LINC symposium, but I think it would be, it's 10 plus years later, we might as well do it. It would be very profitable to do that intellectually, but also to figure better ways of drawing that program alignment and integration. Now, Rodney and I work pretty hard to try and bring each of the federal programs to that same table in the National Ocean Partnership Program, and NASA is almost routinely there. Really, every agency is almost routinely there. It's pretty hard to get everyone together all the time, but I think you've identified a very good subject for us, Patty. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Tom Branchman from Patel. Can I raise a question about the what you're earning. Some percent.
All right, Karen and I just kind of flipped playground style, even odds, and I got this one. Yeah. It's a great question, and the word paradigm is often overused, but truly what you're describing is a paradigm shift for how we provide the public with certain information. There are, in the ocean sector, survey companies that we effectively purchase data from. And that's about half of our hydrographic survey component. The other half are white-hulled NOAA ships executing the surveys. And we do that in partnership, and it's seemingly a very good model because it stimulates a private sector component that has capability. And we're at a time, we recognize we're at a time where when Thomas Jefferson started the Coast Survey in 1807, really it was only government that had the capability to conduct such work. I think the space program is seeing a little bit of that now, and as it accelerates in its maturity, we'll see even more consistent and diverse performance in private launches and the like. The weather community model, I think, is a particularly good one, but it's a particularly complex one because that whole notion has been attempted before. Something that has to be built into any model is the notion that once the information or the data is in the hands of the government, bought and paid for by the government, our practice, our societal practice in the United States is to make government information free and available. So the last transaction, perhaps the maker of a body of data, might be able to sell that data in a series of market participants. But when you run out of that line and you get to the government as the market participant, you basically will then blow the opportunity for future markets to sell that same body of data because our interest is in making that public. Excuse me. And in fact, the president recently issued an executive order that more or less reminded us that publicly bought science information, even not just data, but paying a scientist in order to apply their intellect and generate technical products. If public money paid for it, that information has to be made available to the public within varying scales of time, but nonetheless, it has to be releasable. So that's a real complicator to any market shift that folks want to be looking at. But it's appealing to us to have the notion of providers of scientifically derived information, whether it be meteorological, oceanographic, or a mix of both, where we just pay to acquire the data. And somebody may have been able to build their infrastructure so it's a profitable mechanism for the party creating the science answers, and it's a cost avoider for us that we don't have to keep going down this financial rabbit hole that I would describe as our reliance on traditional methods. So we have to get in pace and in sync with the economic times. So back to weather, there was a very interesting and profitable study, varying use of the word profitable, but the National Academy of Sciences did a study called the Fair Weather Report, and it's referring to the commercial weather sector and the after observation market value, and how there should be a rational distinction between what the federal government chooses to do and provide to the public versus where the private sector picks up. And some of the products that the private sector is generating are absolutely marvelous and amazingly informative in the way that they integrate and present information. So I don't think we have the answer to that yet, but I think you really raise a good problem, a good challenge that we have discussed casually with some members of industry to just posit various notions in terms of how this model could work and how it could look. But I think the realization on both sides is we may have a model that works in the hydrographic survey community, and we're glad that we do, and what variants on that model would be capable of fulfilling our mission elsewhere. I'm sure there's a model out there, but to be honest with you, we've spent most of our time doing our own mission, doing our own thing rather than thinking, how do we change this? That's the conversation we need to be having, and I appreciate you raising it. We need to put more time into that. We need to have more discussions in that. And if there's interest in that, maybe we come back to a meeting like this and have a session that's a roundtable, give people time to think about it, respecting fully business proprietary interests and notions of the like, but to have an open conversation about what kind of models could be working. I think that would be thrilling if the community were interested in doing so. I would love to do that. Thank you. Thank you. I'd welcome any other comments on that particular point, because I think that's a wide open book. Rodney.
And just one thing to add to that, a toll booth certainly could be somewhat problematic, I think, going down that road, having the federal government being keepers of all this conduit information. But what we need to have is similar to what Craig and I do each month, as when we bring all these federal agencies together and we have a conversation on what information needs and what overlap that there is and how we can partner and not duplicate our spending with regard to this. Obviously, BOEM and NOAA have very similar interests. We can partner, we can leverage, we can take it a long way. I just think that kind of conversation that we have every month with our federal partners needs to happen between the public and the private sector often. And where we have the mutual interest, where there is room for us to say, okay, I've got this information, or we're going to do this type of science or study, and where the private sector also is going to be going down a similar road, then we can leverage and put our funds together to answer the right questions, and so we can ultimately make the right decisions out there, and at the same time, hopefully, be further developing technology for economic prosperity at the same time. So I think really in large part, I think what we wanted to say and what we're going to be talking about tomorrow is that relationship, I think, between the public and private sector. We can do a better job, and I think we should certainly try.
There's a part of the gentleman's question that I evaded, but unintentionally, and as I'm thinking back on it, I just want to touch on it now, and sure, I'll get right back to you, and I hope want to reward your interest. There were times past when there were federal proposals to charge various fishing fees to the participants in a particular community, whether it was recreational fishing or whether it was commercial fishing, and those were not supported in the Congress, and they were basically stripped out of whatever budget proposal had at the time made them. So the notion of cost recovery or charging at the initial point of the transaction has been talked about, and I think some of the public economics literature would reflect many other suggestions than we've ever gotten to, but the political willingness to tolerate that rather than accepting the free good from the government that we may be about to shut down is a particular complicating factor. Yes, sir.
I was just going to ask, and it was stimulated by what Rodney said, but I mean, you know, a lot of avenues in the United States are moving towards public-private partnerships. And whether that be any aspect of what you're talking about, be it data sharing or autonomous vehicle sharing, are there avenues where, you know, a thought to think of maybe is, are there avenues out there where the toll booth, the gatekeeper could be the public or the private sector simply because of the arrangement of the partnership, such that maybe investments might be stimulated by energy exploration or some new, you know, waterfront development, marine spatial planning kind of project, where there is going to be a larger private sector interest in that, and there might be money, and you know, it'd be deemed a valuable investment that maybe over time the public sector can either recoup some of those costs or repay those costs, depending on how that arrangement is made. That you could maybe find ways that instead of it just becoming, we just finished the hydrographic survey and now the data is available for the public consumption, maybe there can be a time horizon when that data would become public. In the meantime, there's an avenue for the private sector to capitalize on that data in the short term.
At the exclusion of the hydrographic component of the discussion, because I think we've arrived at a pretty comfortable recipe with the commercial sector for how that works, and it took quite some time, I think, to perfect. But going back to what you were talking about earlier, I think one of the greatest limitations to our achieving what you're suggesting is the fact that, and I'm speaking a little bit more candidly here as a member of just a room full of people trying to have a good discussion, the habit of having to own everything on the federal side. It's our fleet. It's our fleet of ROVs. It's our fleet of whatchamacallits, as opposed to, much as the commercial sector has shown great economy in just acquire it as long as you need it, have the service of the device as long as you need it, and then you turn it back to the owner. So it's a different model. Now, there are certain circumstances where our federal responsibility would require us to have at the ready certain assets capable of being deployed. But I think what we're talking about is that creative space where not everything that we're talking about has to be part of a federal ready-to-be-deployed inventory. In certain aspects, we are diversifying. We are gathering some of our fisheries data from commercial fishing vessels that are sailing in pretty much the same performance as a research vessel would, but we also have the research vessels that were exclusively designed and dedicated to that kind of study to be complementing that information, or the fishery scientist could remind me which one's complementing the other, but they work in tandem. But I think one of the greater limitations that we probably have demonstrated to the commercial community over time is a frustration to the commercial community that we've got to own everything. And I think there are many other creative ways that we could find the ability to have technology launched without us owning it, and that we just either lease it or buy the data or the like. In terms of how much time does data need to soak before it becomes public, I think there's quite a latitude, but that time is increasingly shrinking, and largely it was time lent to the principal investigator or the scientist to extract the intellectual product out of the data derived, make a publication, and offer it to the community. Whereas I think what we're talking about is more commercially, once you gather those data, can there be a timeline? I think it's an interesting facet to the model, and I'm sure that there's a place where that's going to fit right.
And it doesn't need to be just hydrographic. I mean, if you think about all of the offshore removal construction projects that are in some time horizon, those projects can be very difficult to construct. There's a lot of site characterization issues that are going to come with that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also going to be weather limitations on when you can be out in the field to do it. And the data that the construction contractors basically requires in order to do their jobs right, that's valuable data. And what we'll collect that will be the same type of senses that you might choose to own or you might choose to buy data from.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be basically turning the private sector into your own personal rental pool for certain projects.
Right.
certain locations.
So that kind of integrated solution, I think, is really good and worth further discussion. I'd welcome any other comments on that or any other remark. I think the gentleman with the tan jacket and then the gentleman with the yellow shirt.
This is going to sound a little facetious, but I don't mean it to be. Why isn't there a Noaa Kickstarter? People spend, we have, Noaa always makes it's easy for Noaa to make a compelling case for ocean acidification or a variety of problems. And there's only a channel that's so wide that the government will ever flow money down to you by that method. Why isn't there some means of getting directly to the public to say, hey, Noaa has this problem, and this problem, they affect you. Forgo a beer this week and fund this project. Millions of Americans would do that. I mean, people raise $100,000, $300,000 every day for really silly stuff. And this is really important stuff. And I know that Noaa can't take contributions directly. Right now I'm working with some guys out in Savannah, and they can't get my project out on the water because their motor has a scored cylinder, and they don't know whether they're going to be able to repair that boat. And how do we make it so that the people of America can say, hey, gee, this is important, we need to fix this, and make that happen, because that money is out there and it flows furiously fast. I mean, through Kickstarter and through several other crowdfunding sources now. How do we build a crowdfunding source to get the Noaa mission funded?
A couple of answers to that.
Well, right, yeah.
I'm sorry.
But how do we get that to Noaa? If there was a form on my taxes that said, hey, I will give $5 extra on my taxes to Noaa, would it get to Noaa, or would it fund something else? But
I think that formula would find itself in the general treasury rather than directly going to Noaa. But there are legislative provisions that allow certain programs in Noaa to accept donations, either in kind or material donations, and in some cases dollar donations. It's very unique, and it's a very narrow legislative provision that allows that. But the larger question you ask, I think, you warm my heart by identifying Noaa as a potential recipient, but I think the ocean science community writ large is really deserving of that level of attention. And I think it is, to a great extent, a social frustration of what the oceans are worth. It's an interesting conversation that I think we each might have had in many different fora. If I look at what the nation spends on oceans for energy and for military activities, it's a pretty significant sum. But the civil science side is far more modest, and that's the one that in these types of conversations we more routinely rely on. If we were to look at the gains to the civil science community, I think as the Chancellor brought out this morning, I think it was his comments this morning, about how technology was advanced through war and delivered to the science community that gave us incentives, equipment, capabilities that didn't exist before and probably would have taken much longer to develop but for the war. So if we looked at the whole envelope of ocean spending and ocean technology and science spending, there are spin-offs that are directly rewarding the science community today through military-based investments. Similarly in space, I think the classic evaluation of Tang and other products, it was more methodology and material that was the product of space exploration so far. But in comparing those two or comparing ocean science to any other federal expenditure, it's really tough to pit one against the other, but I'm probably not the best spokesperson for this because I still have to represent the interests of the federal government in this taking. But I think that's more of a question for the forum of democracy, and fully respect people's views and the opportunity to have views, whether they be similar or divergent in that regard. I do believe that over the course of history, in this past 50 years, we've created and accepted a rather casual understanding of what it costs to do ocean science, largely led by the wondrous films of Jacques Cousteau and other underwater explorers. It was basically a guy with scuba equipment or a gal with scuba equipment partaking in a scientific exploration. And the world's very different today, but I don't know that our American mindset has really progressed beyond the Jacques Cousteau notion of what it takes to conduct ocean science and the very rapid escalation of costs to go to sea today in order to conduct that science. I think the public always understood that, for example, I think we mentioned space exploration earlier. Launching a rocket's a big darn thing, and that is expensive, and we accept that. So I think our ability to communicate, and I appreciate you raising this, our ability to communicate the complexity of the nature of these scientific undertakings, we might not be as effective as we would hope to be in communicating that. Thank you. Thank you. There was another comment.
Well, I was going to build on the previous one, but if it's okay with comment, that's my turn.
All right, so let me pull this out just a little bit, because I'm really intrigued by where this conversation was going in the notion of what kind of business models could work better than the ones that you have seen us practice thus far. This is really going to feed in and help the discussion that Rodney and I hope to have tomorrow with NOP, but let's get started now.
That's where I was going to go. And so let's go back to that rental notion of a private enterprise being the organization to go to for something, whether it be a device or really turns into a set of data that you would then do something with. The symmetry is maybe a little bit easier to imagine that working because of the cost of entry. I mean, who's going to go back out and reshoot the whole, bay? You did it. God bless you. And we know enough people that need it, and we'll make products from it. You got it. The other things that you can sample are less costly to get into and sample. And so that notion you had about soak time, maybe give them a couple of months or years to work it, benefit from it, and then release it. That's what we're trying to figure out. Because what you're really doing is limiting access. You're defining something as intellectual property, and that you would give the person who originally created it first shot at selling it, and then eventually it becomes free. That's what private enterprises are scared about. They just can't imagine investing, going into this thing, and then having the agency decide, well, let's open it up. Wait a minute, I had 5 years of a business investment in trying to do some kind of sampling because I thought I was going to be the designated renter. I'm not asking you to make markets, but that's the tension that private enterprises are facing when they think about trying to invest and resell it, is that the job at explaining where it's possible to have rules of engagement and where it's not, where it's, well, okay, if you can rent cars cheaper, you're the new rental agency. That might just be capitalism. But the cost of entry to do it into the marine observation would be able to make a lot of people stay home.
What could be a deal maker, number one, you're buying certainty in your business model, right? So that if in selling data to the government and the government's going to release it, you probably are going to be looking to charge the government a higher cost than if you had multiple transactions that you could generate a profit from as a business person. But what I think makes this model appealing as a sweet spot is because of investments that have been made in other areas rather than uniquely working on our technical challenge. Other parts of society have paid for the investments in some of those technical challenges to build ocean tools that might have been designed for a different outcome other than our application. And if in making that course change to our application, there's a remarkable economy of us paying, now we're closing in, but us paying a level that is still profitable for the private sector, but a significant cost avoidance for us. That would be the sweet spot that we're looking for. Because I don't think that we would find the kind of in certain European countries or in certain cases for environmental information in New Zealand and I believe in parts of Australia, or excuse me, in Australia, in parts of their science portfolio, there are additional social payments to the maker of those observations. Whereas in America, it's free and open, and your tax dollar generates it. So I think what we're dealing with is something that has been fundamentally, traditionally American as a value. And whether we get to change that or not is a larger question that would probably not be unique to the ocean environment. But if we can find that sweet spot where, because of the unaffordability of our current methods of operations, that really creates an incentive for us to find a different way of doing business, because of what may be, in some cases, remarkably inexpensive, in other cases, marginally inexpensive technology alternatives, that we should be having those conversations, maybe just throwing some models around as to what could work for a different application. I don't want to mess up what I think is done really well in the hydrographic community, but if there are other areas that we could use other notions of data sets and have that kind of conversation, I think that would be really good. I appreciate the concern, though. I really do understand the concern why spending huge amounts of R&D in order to try and arrive at a particular point and then only to be frustrated in it, that's a huge risk. I get that. Yes?
So what's Noah's dream scenario with, especially looking at these right here, like different approaches to ocean exploration? Are you taking it as a, let's open these doors and we have these grants and see who applies for it and what ideas come in? Or do you have priorities for basin scale, feature scale, identify, characterize? What would you guys like to see ideally?
I think what you're touching on is just what we were discussing as far as the evolution from the presidential report priorities to the most recent national forum discussions. We've had the Ocean Exploration Program has had at least 3 workshops in the interim on priorities in the Atlantic, the Pacific, and the Caribbean basins, and looked at identifying different priorities within those basins as we've been conducting the program. And so really it's an ongoing process to identify those priorities, and now we're using the forum as a venue to help address those at all. And we have 2 people here that might be able to add something to that. Steve, do you have anything more? Steve? Okay. Right, right.
Can everyone hear Steve in the back?
Okay. Yeah. And we just had the host of the town hall on the forum just entered the room today, David. So definitely encourage you to come out tomorrow morning. David, if you have anything you want to add to that.
Just that at the meeting we had in Long Beach, and you see the little yellow box there. Oh, thank you. You see the yellow box there. I think we're going to have a very interesting panel on the results of the Ocean Exploration 2020 Forum. The community of explorers across the nation, private sector, non-governmental, as well as government, academic, we're pretty clear on the consensus that the Arctic is a very high priority. Also interestingly, you see it up here that there was a priority for exploring processes and phenomena like ocean acidification and looking more at the water column, not just at the seafloor. So the community came together. We had about 120 people, many of the names you would recognize, and the consensus was quite striking. And we'll talk much more about that at the panel on Thursday morning. Thanks.
All right, thank you, David. I think really the biggest message with that is we are looking to the community to help make those, to define those priorities and discuss those priorities as we go ahead.
You know, Karen, one of the reasons I like coming to these meetings is I get to learn a lot, sometimes about my own agency. Chris Beaverson, who has spent some time at OSTP, the Office of Science and Technology Policy of the President, and also in NESDIS, the satellite system, has a model that I wanted to return to this gentleman's observation where we do have another variation. Chris, why don't you share what you just told me?
Sure. Just to address the commercialization of data, we do buy radar sets, synthetic aperture radar data sets from a private provider, but we're limited in its distribution, but we can provide an interpretive product from that data. So there is, you know, it's restricted, but you know, the provider can then sell it, you know, multiple times for other uses. So there is a model out there for that you know, could be intriguing for other ocean products.
We're coming up on our time.
Actually, it is 5 o'clock.
All right, so it's 5 o'clock somewhere, including San Diego. And I want to thank Karen, and I want to thank Chris, and also the other folks who helped to construct this session. But I want to thank you for turning out, spending your time with us, and once again contributing your thoughts and your intellectual energy to what will be our success. I'd like to think that on occasion you are reminded that we continue to work for you. Everyone in this room is our employer, and we know that. We recognize that. We're always trying to do the right job for the public. But listening to you help guide us on these pathways, including in particular, I'm really stimulated by this discussion about the different economic models we might be looking at. That's a discussion that is part of our technology advancement notion. It's also part of how we implement and administer various programs. So I'm really inspired by that, and I want to welcome you to communicate with us. Do we have a web address or?
We've got a couple of follow-up comments.
Okay. So thank you. Thank you. Because we want to keep this dialogue active as it has been through the year. What we started last year really opened a lot of doors for communications and discussions from folks during the course of the year. It's gotten us to a much better point where we are now, but I want to keep that moving forward. We've heard some really good things working with NATO, working with different commercial models, finding greater depth and description of the kinds of priorities we might see in the different layering of technology transitions that we might be looking for. This has been very fulfilling for me, and I want to thank you all very much. And Karen, you had some closing comments.
Yes.
Go ahead, please. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Craig. Just a couple things for following up. Number one, you'd ask about the presentation. We will make this presentation available on our NOAA Ocean Exploration website. It's in the process of a transition right now. Let's see. We have explore.noaa.gov. We've just updated. We had a kind of two different websites. That was a kind of an office website and a public website. But this, I believe this address should have a technology link for the technology program when you go to that. And you should be able to, and I'll have this posted there. So, and if it's not, if I'm wrong about that, Google NOAA Ocean Exploration Technology Program. You should be able to find it. So we will make that available. The final encouragement is to contact either me or Chris Beaverson with any further questions about this. And also, the main thing is suggestions for engagement of our interagency technology group, TFORT, and how we can best engage you all. So if there are mechanisms of engagement, you know, here we've got the Oceans Forum, website chats, you know, different mechanisms of engagement that you might go home and say, God, I wish I could talk to those guys about XYZ, you know, or I just had an idea about that. Feel free to email us about that, because we'll be talking with this group about how to implement the TFORT program. And so if you have any questions or ideas, comments about that, please feel free to contact us And then other just basic questions about some of the funding opportunities, things like that. We're definitely open to interact with you. Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody, very much. I know we have a open exhibit happy hour, I think, going on right now.